Our final speaker of the session will be Jay Carpenter.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Hello.
So, let me tell you a little bit about who I am and why I'm passionate about this topic of federated consumer safeguards. In this context, my background, I've spent numerous years in the telecommunications industry working with the AT&Ts and the Verizons of the world in order to usher in a market-based paradigm for telephone number allocation. And this was from like 2004 to 2015. 2004 to 2019, this finally became reality. So I've got some experience in the regulatory realm in terms of looking at, okay, this is the way we used to do business, and now how could we do business? Around 2014, I saw something called blockchain emerge, and I said, aha, here is the way that the intention could be fulfilled that the AT&Ts and the Verizons of the world have been trying to usher in a decentralized way. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is because A, I've got experience in the struggle, let's say, to mesh the legacy regulatory realm with what's happening in a contemporary context. And B, I have seen the same thing happen in the telecommunications world as what's happening now in the decentralized Web3 world. So that's the crux of my experience. And we've had a lot of conversation during this conference about the potential for regulatory sandboxes. And I've got some experience with that because Arizona was one of the first to usher in a regulatory sandbox in the realm of fintech. So I know the fellow who was the architect for the Arizona regulatory fintech sandbox, who also went to DC and was with the Consumer Financial Protection Board. So the point of this presentation is to open up a new realm, or at least consideration, that A is positive incentive, market-based, and choice, which is radically different than the usual prescriptive and punitive approach that regulations take. So it's called the catchy name of Federated Consumer Safeguards. So we're going to go through this, and then I've gotten permission at basically noon to do a sort of a workshop where we're going to take this idea and do this. We're going to actually, excuse me, why is it not showing the Honey web game? Okay, here it is. So we're going to do this. We're actually going to step through this Federated Consumer Safeguards. We're going to use real money. We're going to use, now I got your attention. We're going to use dice, we're going to play blackjack, and we're going to use these packets of honey to represent tokens. So you're welcome to stick around for that. I just wanted to give you a little preview of how this thing's going to go. So hopefully that's, and you're welcome to go out and get lunch and bring it in and have lunch while we play with this mischief called honey. So let's, I'm going to quickly run through this, hopefully leave about 5 minutes so that we can have some questions and discussion. I know there are some folks in this room that I've heard your presentations, and I'm really excited that you're here, and I welcome your feedback on this proposal. So what is this? It basically looks at regulatory approaches. I'm going to use a football analogy to illustrate what I see is missing out of the current sandbox realm. We're going to talk about decentralized and centralized trust. I'm going to show you a proposal, and then we can kind of open it up for conclusion. And then during lunch, we'll play the web game. So the aims of regulation. What's the aim of regulation? Basically to provide some sort of recourse or restoration if something goes wrong for whatever reason to whoever the consumers are. Okay? That's great. But usually the way to accomplish that is we're gonna look in advance and we're gonna put down a set of rules that can be, you can either do this or you can't do this. So usually the term protection is used, consumer protections. I assert that maybe a more interesting term is safeguards. So what do I mean by safeguards? When I was, I think in my late 20s, after graduate school, a couple of my friends and I did a river rafting trip down to Colorado. So we were on a boat very similar to this, having a good time. And like, we had a river guide who was in charge, the captain of the boat. And like day one or day two, we started saying, hey, we want to swim a rapid. And the river boat guide said, no, you can't do that. Oh, come on, let us swim a rapid. Finally, like the last day or the second last day, the guide said, okay, if you guys want to swim a rapid, put on a life preserver. Here's a rapid coming up. Jump in and have fun. Okay? I jumped in. Stupid idea. Really, really stupid idea. But the point is this. Up until that point where the guide said, you can do this, but you've got to take the safeguard of putting on a life preserver. Okay? That's different than everything he had said up to that point where, no, you cannot do this. Now, I get the logic. If we had jumped into that river and hurt ourselves, it would have disrupted the entire trip. But it also excluded the ability for us to have this adventure and for me to be basically sharing this with you now. But the point is to draw a clear distinction between protections, in my view, and safeguards. And I assert that there's a way to structure the regulatory sandboxes so that they have safeguards and they provide a financial backstop for token holders. And that's basically what we're going to talk about here. Here's a little description of regulatory sandboxes. You can read this. This is all available online. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But here's the way sandboxes work right now. Basically, it's like this. You have the football players on the field, which are the entrepreneurs, the developers, and so forth. And they're trying to win the game. They're trying to figure out the game. They're trying to figure out the opponent. And then you've got the referees on the side, which represent basically the regulators. That's great, except there's something missing in the middle that I assert would make a difference here, which is this, having a coach in the middle. So if you don't know, and again, I'm showing my age, but this is the famous Vince Lombardi, who the Super Bowl trophy is named after. That's what I think is missing in the regulatory sandbox realm. So who could serve as that coach? It could be the decentralized D-Web foundation, such as Ethereum, which currently has a market cap of about $250 billion and regularly sponsors hackathons, startups, and so forth, and funds those items. Filecoin Foundation does the same thing, decentralized web storage constructs. The Stellar Foundation, which I'm familiar with, which also has allocated about $6 billion of their potential Stellar Lumen tokens to foster the innovation and the decentralized web ecosystem. So imagine that those, and these are just examples, there are more. Imagine those foundations could basically serve like the Coach Lombardi up in the upper right-hand corner. What would that look like? And by the way, Stellar is, according to their documentation, they're not owned by anybody. This is almost like a community sovereignty, virtual sovereignty or cyber sovereignty. So here's a note in their documentation about how they've allocated a large portion of their tokens in order to fund innovation like we're talking about. Here's an example. This is actually at the Desert Blockchain Camp here in Phoenix, Arizona. This is called the Crypto Cannoneer. This is a game that's designed to teach people about cryptocurrency. It can be, you can fire off tennis balls through this air cannon from anywhere in the world using the Telegram app, and it's tied to the Stellar Lumen ecosystem. This received $20,000, or maybe it was $22,000 in funding in 2021 from the Stellar Community Foundation. So here's a on-the-court, real-life example of fostering innovation through one of these decentralized web foundations. And here's some details on the Stellar Community Fund and some specifics on the Crypto Cannoneer. And the other point is that Shane Sandler is a qualified innovator who has an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering and an MBA from Arizona State University. So, the Stellar community has voted on the Crypto Cannoneer in order to provide this funding. So there's a certain amount of underwriting that has gone on that's natural in this context. The other part is we have these states. Arizona, there's our governor talking about blockchain. Recently, Texas, another governor talking about blockchain. And Wyoming, another governor talking about blockchain. And in this particular video, the governor of Wyoming, Mark Gordon, goes at length about the regulatory dilemma associated with innovation and decentralization. Now, here is an on-the-court example of a project called Odyssey and Library that is a decentralized YouTube alternative. Quite interesting, particularly in the realm of what has happened with Twitter. This is the type of innovation that I assert that people are looking for. Unfortunately, if you look at this video, which is a podcast with a Linux group, the fellow in the lower right, Jeremy Kaufman, who, by the way, is pretty well qualified, talks about this, which is an SEC charge over libraries' tokens, which has cost them tremendous amounts of legal fees and uncertainty. And he talks about the dilemma they face in just getting some sort of clarity around what can we do and what can't we do. Okay, and here's Odyssey itself, which you can see looks a lot like YouTube. So let's talk about decentralized trust and centralized trust. In the centralized trust realm, we start with an assumption of trust. If we deal with a bank or an institution like an insurance company, we assume that they are trustworthy. Over time, that trust might erode into distrust because of cyber breaches and so forth. In the decentralized construct, it's 180 degrees opposite. We start with an assumption of distrust. I assume that if I'm dealing with a new blockchain or a new decentralized ecosystem, everybody in that realm would willingly take my valuable items. So that's an example of how there's a mismatch between trying to apply the old legacy regulatory realm with the new contemporary realm. Now, let me go into a historical example that I have experience with, the telecom realm. there were years, decades of telecom regulation that were built up based upon the telephone system being a circuit switched pattern, which was point A to point B. Dial a number, you pick up the phone, dial a number, and I could talk to AJ or whatever, and there was a clear path. Well, then something came along called packet switching, and that was all disrupted. But in the meantime, there were all these regulatory agencies that sprung up around the world, and this quandary of, okay, how do you define a telephone call in an IP packet world? Well, the fact is, they still can't define what a telephone call is. Why? Well, it's because it's a different paradigm. Same thing with radio communications. And the same thing with television. Because guess what? This thing called YouTube came along. And when YouTube came along, is it a telephone call? Is it a radio broadcast? Is it a television broadcast? Well, guess what? It's all of the above. So trying to apply the old circuit switch model to the new contemporary construct was impossible. Same thing with library and Odyssey. Is it an equity? Is it a currency? Is it a utility token like this packet of honey over here? Well, guess what? It depends on the viewer. So some of you are looking at this and you're saying, oh, that woman's probably over 35 years old. Some of you are looking at it saying, no, that woman's clearly younger than 35. Isn't that strange? Because it's the same thing. It's the same black and white marks. So we have this complete 180-degree opposite view of what is the reality of this. So the Federated Consumer Safeguards basically says, hey, let's play with something where there's a financial backstop that's provided by these coaches, being the decentralized foundations like Ethereum and so forth. Something like put options or insurance. And basically that's it. We will play the web honey game, which will be clearly show how this might work, where some of us will be token holders, will be able to hold tokens, and also buy basically puts that if something goes wrong, you'll get at least half your money back from one of the foundations. So the next steps, socialize it, present it, conferences, prototype, approach startups, approach decentralized foundations, approach state regulators, see if it flies. And we've got questions. There's additional material in here I'm going to quickly step through. We've actually done this at Desert Blockchain Camp. We're going to play the honey game. This is Paul Watkins, who was the architect of the Arizona FinTech Sandbox. These are my submissions from 2004 to 2019 regarding a market-based allocation model. Why is this important? Because I assert the reason the Ukraine military has survived this long is because they have embraced blockchain and decentralization. This, you should definitely watch this. Thomas E. Ricks at Cronkite, why I fear we'll lose the next big war. And Estonia, also on the border of Russia, has also embraced blockchain and decentralization, partly because of their concern around Russia. So here you can see kind of a map, centralized versus decentralized. So I'm going to stop there. Questions? We're a minute over. Are we done?
We have well, the clocks are different, but
Okay.
by the clock I'm following, we have a minute or less.
So at, let's say 12:10, I will start the HoneyWeb game. So you'll have a chance to go get some lunch and come back if you'd like. I'll quickly go through another presentation. Any questions, any comments? Cool.
Thank you.